The grand cathedral stood like a fortress of history, its towering spires piercing the night sky as the world's most anticipated debate prepared to unfold. Beneath the glow of 1,000 candles, two men, one of faith, one of reason, faced each other, their words destined to shape the hearts and minds of those watching. A battle of ideas would soon begin, but neither could predict the journey that lay ahead. A confrontation not just of intellect, but of the very essence of existence. Itself, the hall was silent. The air, thick with centuries of whispered prayers and quiet devotion, carried a solemn weight that even Elon Musk, with his unshakable confidence, could not ignore. He had stood in the presence of world leaders, revolutionized industries, and launched his ambitions beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Yet there was something different about this moment. The Vatican had opened its doors for this unprecedented conversation, and the world was watching. Pope Francis, clad in white, sat composed, his expression one of quiet assurance. He was no stranger to scrutiny or skepticism, but this was not just another theological discussion. Musk was not here to listen. He was here to challenge, to dissect belief itself with the sharp scalpel of reason. Yet, beneath the steel of logic, something flickered in his eyes. A curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper, something he had not yet named. The audience, philosophers, scientists, theologians, and political figures, held their breath as the first words were spoken. Musk, ever the pragmatist, began with an assertion that reverberated through the cavernous space. Belief in God, he argued, was a relic of the past, a construct designed for a world that no longer existed. Humanity had evolved beyond myth and superstition. It was reason, not faith, that had carried civilization forward. The Pope listened, unshaken. His presence was not one of defense, but of quiet strength, as though he had met this argument before, not just in debates, but in the hearts of millions who had asked the same questions. When he spoke, it was not in opposition, but in revelation. Faith, he explained, was not a thing to be proven. It was something felt, something lived. It was found in love, in connection, in the spaces between human souls. Musk leaned forward, his mind moving as fast as the machines he built. He was not interested in poetic sentiment. He wanted evidence. How could something as intangible as faith hold weight in a world ruled by data? If it could not be measured, if it could not be tested, then how could it be real? His voice, steady, yet edged with an almost imperceptible frustration, cut through the reverence of the cathedral. The discussion intensified. The Pope spoke of human suffering, of hope, of the moments where logic alone failed to provide comfort. Musk countered with the brutal efficiency of science, of technology, of the tangible solutions to human problems. The world needed answers, not prayers. The Pope did not disagree. He simply asked whether solutions alone were enough. The tension in the room grew. The two men, titans of thought, stood at an impasse, each representing a truth that neither could fully deny. The debate was no longer just about God. It was about what it meant to be human, and in that moment something unexpected happened. Musk hesitated, not because he had lost the argument, but because something deeper was stirring. A question not about facts, but about himself. The conversation had not ended. It had only just begun. The hesitation was brief, almost imperceptible. But in a debate of such magnitude, every flicker of doubt was a battle scar. The audience noticed. The Pope noticed. Musk himself felt it before he could even understand what had caused it. For a man who built his empire on certainty, on numbers, on logic that bent reality itself to his will, the sensation was foreign, unsettling, even. But he pushed forward, unwilling to yield to a moment of weakness. His voice sharpened, slicing through the cathedral's solemn air. He leaned forward now, his posture commanding, his mind reasserting itself. If faith was something to be felt, Then what of all those who had felt nothing? What of those who reached into the void for comfort and found only silence? If faith was so intrinsic to the human experience, why had history been filled with so much suffering in its name? His words hit like hammer blows against the ancient walls, reverberating into the stone itself. The Pope did not flinch. He had heard these questions before from the lost, the grieving, the skeptics who had come to him not seeking conversion, but answers that did not exist in the realm of logic. And so, as Musk pressed on, unraveling faith like a threadbare fabric, Francis did not defend. He did not refute. He simply asked, had logic ever been enough? The question hung in the air between them. Musk furrowed his brow, momentarily thrown by its simplicity. The Pope leaned in slightly now, his presence a contrast to Musk's intensity. His voice was not combative, but certain, carrying the weight of generations of belief, of stories told across millennia. For all his technological achievements, for all the ways Musk had propelled humanity into a new age, had it brought him peace? He had built rockets to escape Earth, but could he ever escape himself? He had constructed artificial intelligence capable of mimicking human thought, but had he ever truly understood the depths of the human soul? Musk's lips pressed together. The cathedral's glow, once a backdrop to the confrontation, now felt oppressive, as if the weight of centuries bore down on him. This was not the first time he had encountered these questions. He had buried them before, beneath the endless pursuit of progress. But tonight, under the gaze of history, they clawed their way back to the surface. The Pope did not let up. Faith, he explained, was not an alternative to reason. It was not an enemy of science, nor a crutch for the weak-minded. It was the acknowledgement of something greater than oneself. Not an invisible hand guiding the world, not an old man in the sky dictating morality, but a presence woven into love, into connection, into the moments where logic alone failed to capture the fullness of human experience. Musk exhaled sharply, his frustration surfacing. Love, connection, these were vague concepts, immeasurable, subjective. They were real, yes, but they did not require faith in something beyond the human experience. He had seen what humans could accomplish through sheer will, through intelligence. Why seek meaning in something that could not be proven? The Pope's response was patient but unyielding. Because, he said, meaning was not about proof. It was about purpose. Science could explain how the stars were born, how they burned, and how they would die, but it could not explain why a man looked up at them and felt awe. It could not quantify the quiet, unspoken bond between a mother and child, or the way music stirred something ancient in the soul. Faith did not demand that one reject knowledge. It asked only that one accept that not everything worth knowing could be measured. Musk's fingers curled slightly against the polished wooden arm of his chair. The argument was poetic, but it was still not enough. He had spent his life chasing the limits of human potential. He had witnessed the power of minds unshackled by superstition, by the confines of religious tradition. He had no desire for an invisible force to dictate his path. Yet the Pope was not trying to dictate anything. He was not asking Musk to submit, nor to abandon reason. He was only asking him to consider the possibility that logic alone was not enough to explain the full complexity of existence, that perhaps beyond the numbers, beyond the equations and calculations that defined Musk's world, there was something that could not be programmed or engineered. The debate was no longer about God, not in the traditional sense. It had evolved into something else, a battle between certainty and doubt, between control and surrender. And for the first time in a long time, Musk found himself standing at the edge of something he did not yet understand. The tension in the room was suffocating. The audience, once passive observers, were now pulled into the gravity of the exchange. Some leaned forward, hanging on every word. Others remained still, caught in the quiet realization that this was no longer a simple intellectual exercise. It was something raw, something deeply human. Musk shifted in his seat, his thoughts racing. He was not a man easily swayed. He did not believe in things without evidence, but he was also a man who had spent his life looking toward the future, toward what was possible rather than what was known. And now, in this cathedral built on centuries of belief, he was being asked to entertain the greatest possibility of all, that there was something beyond even his understanding. The Pope sat back slightly, watching. He did not need to press further. The questions had been planted, and he knew that it was not his role to force the answers. Faith did not come through debate. It did not emerge from arguments won or lost. It was a journey. And for Musk, whether he realized it or not, that journey had already begun. But there was still much left unsaid. Musk was not yet ready to concede anything, and the fire in his eyes had not dimmed. If anything, the confrontation had only fueled him further. He had come here to dismantle faith with logic. Now he was fighting to prove something deeper, perhaps not to the Pope nor to the audience, but to himself. And so he did what he did best. He pressed forward, he challenged, he demanded more. If faith was truly a force beyond understanding, then why did suffering exist? Why did the world remain broken, no matter how much good people sought to do? If love and connection were the presence of the divine, then why did they so often fail? The Pope did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied Musk carefully, as if seeing something beyond the argument itself. And then, quietly, he spoke again. The next part of the conversation would not be about belief. It would not be about proof. It would be about the one thing Musk had spent his life trying to conquer: suffering. And in that moment, for the first time in the entire debate, the air shifted. The confrontation was no longer about winning. It was about something far more personal, and Musk felt it. The shift in the room was almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. The confrontation had been fierce, charged with intellect and certainty. But now the energy was different, heavier, slower, almost suffocating. It was as though the weight of the conversation had finally settled upon Musk's shoulders. Until now he had debated from a place of control, from the realm of facts, logic, and argument. But suffering was something else entirely. For a moment he did not respond. His mind, so quick to dissect, to challenge, found itself navigating unfamiliar terrain. Suffering was not an abstraction. It was not a concept that could be resolved through algorithms or calculations. It was something real, something that had shaped him in ways he had never truly examined. The Pope did not press. He simply waited, allowing the silence to stretch between them, as if he knew Musk was already wrestling with the question in ways he had never done before. The audience, once electrified by the intensity of the debate, now sat motionless, sensing that something deeper was about to unfold. Musk exhaled, leaning back ever so slightly. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked the sharpness it had carried earlier. It was still firm, still controlled. But now there was something beneath it, something that was not quite doubt, but not quite certainty either. If faith was real, he asked, if it was this force of love and connection that the Pope spoke of, then why did the world remain so broken? Why did innocent children suffer? Why did good people die before their time? If faith brought meaning, then what meaning was there in senseless tragedy? The words echoed in the vast cathedral, each one carrying an unspoken weight. The Pope's expression remained calm, but his eyes carried something deeper, something ancient. He had heard these questions before, not in the grand halls of intellectual debate, but in the trembling voices of those who had lost everything, mothers who had buried children, refugees who had fled from war, people who had prayed for miracles that never came. And so, he answered, not as a scholar, not as a religious leader, but as a man who had seen the full breadth of human suffering. Suffering, he said, was not proof of God's absence, but the very reason faith existed at all. Not to erase pain, not to justify it, but to walk through it without being destroyed by it, to hold on to love even when it was easier to turn to despair. Musk's jaw tightened. That, he thought, was an easy answer. Too easy. He pressed again. Suffering was not just an emotional experience. It was a reality. Children starved. Wars raged. Diseases tore apart families. Science worked to fix these things, to eliminate suffering wherever possible. But faith simply asked people to endure. It asked them to accept what they could not change. How was that anything but surrender? The Pope's gaze did not waver. Faith, he said, was not surrender. It was resilience. It was the belief that even in suffering, even in darkness, love still mattered. That kindness still mattered. That human connection was not just an accident of evolution, but something greater, something sacred. Musk's fingers curled against the polished wood of his chair. He had spent his life defying limitations, bending the laws of physics to his will, proving that what was once impossible was merely a problem yet to be solved. But this was different. The human experience, in all its messiness, in all its grief and suffering, could not be solved. It could only be endured. He thought of his own life, of the struggles, the losses, the sacrifices. The world saw him as invincible, a man who had conquered the impossible time and time again. But they did not see the toll it took. They did not see the isolation, the weight of expectations, the moments of exhaustion that no amount of innovation could erase. And for the first time, in this debate that had begun as a battle of ideas, Musk found himself staring into something far more personal. He did not believe in faith, not in the way the Pope described, but he understood suffering. He understood the need to push forward, to find meaning even when the world refused to give it. Was that not, in some way, its own form of faith? The thought unsettled him. He was not ready to accept it. Not yet. And so, he countered, if faith was about resilience, about love, then why had it so often been twisted into something else? Why had religion been used to justify war, oppression, suffering inflicted not by chance, but by the very people who claimed to follow God? If faith was meant to uplift, then why had it so often been a tool for control? This time, the Pope did not respond immediately. He sat with the question, as though carrying the full weight of its truth. Yes, he admitted, faith had been twisted. It had been weaponized, corrupted by those who sought power rather than truth. But that was not faith's failure. It was humanity's. The room was utterly still. Faith, the Pope continued, was not found in institutions. It was not found in dogma, in rituals performed out of obligation. It was found in the quiet, in the unseen moments of kindness, in the sacrifices, made not for reward, but because love demanded them. It was found in the father who worked endless hours to provide for his children, in the stranger who stopped to help another without expectation. It was, the Pope said, the very thing that made life worth living. Musk's expression was unreadable. The fire of confrontation still burned within him, but there was something else. Now something less sure, something questioning. He did not believe in a higher power. He did not believe in miracles, but as he sat in this cathedral, in the glow of flickering candlelight, in the presence of a man who had dedicated his life to something unseen, he found himself facing a question he could not easily dismiss. What if faith was not about proving the existence of God? What if it was simply about choosing to believe in something greater than oneself? For a man who had spent his entire life reaching for the stars, the question was unsettling. Because for the first time it was not a question of science, it was a question of the soul. The debate had changed shape. What began as a battle of intellect had transformed into something raw, something personal. The weight of the discussion was no longer measured in facts or philosophy, but in the silences between words, in the lingering echoes of questions that had no easy answers. Musk's mind raced, searching for solid ground. He had built his empire on the ability to cut through uncertainty, to find solutions where others only saw obstacles. But now, for the first time in a long time, he felt something dangerously close to hesitation. The Pope sat in quiet patience, as if he could see the battle raging within Musk, as if he knew this was not just about theology or faith. It was about something deeper, something unspoken. Musk exhaled, the tension in his shoulders unyielding. If faith, as the Pope described, was about love, about resilience, about something greater than oneself, then what was the difference between that and human will? He had seen people change the world through sheer determination, through science, innovation, the relentless pursuit of knowledge. If faith was just a metaphor for the perseverance of the human spirit, then why attach it to something divine? The Pope's eyes did not waver because, he said, human will alone was not enough. Will could build, will could conquer, but it could not heal the wounds that were invisible. It could not replace the need for meaning, for connection. Faith was not about replacing reason. It was about giving it purpose. Musk's jaw tightened. Purpose. That word again, it haunted him. For years his purpose had been clear: to push humanity forward, to extend life beyond Earth, to ensure survival in an uncertain universe. He had lived with singular focus, with an almost ruthless clarity of vision. But now, in the depths of this ancient cathedral, he found himself questioning, was survival enough? The Pope leaned forward now, his voice calm but firm. What, he asked, did Musk truly believe humanity was searching for? Not just in space, not just in technology, but in their hearts? Musk hesitated, caught off guard by the question. He had always believed that humanity sought progress, expansion, the next frontier. That was what had driven him, what had defined him. But now, as the words hung in the air, he felt their weight differently. Was it truly just progress, or was it something else, something deeper, something unnamed? The Pope pressed on. Humanity did not just seek advancement, he said. It sought belonging, it sought meaning, it sought something beyond itself. That was why people had always looked to the stars, why they had always reached for what lay beyond their grasp. And that, he said, was where faith lived, not in certainty, but in the longing itself. Musk inhaled sharply. It was poetic, but was it true? He thought of the thousands of people who had devoted themselves to his vision, the engineers, the scientists, the dreamers. They did not work tirelessly because of faith. They worked because of knowledge, because of purpose, because they believed in something tangible. Or did they? The realization crept in, slow and unsettling. Perhaps their belief was not so different from faith after all. It was not built on proof. It was built on hope, on the belief that something better could exist, even if it had not yet been realized. And suddenly the line between faith and reason was not as clear as it had once been. Pope saw the shift in his expression. He did not press further. He did not need to. Musk's hands curled slightly, his mind wrestling with the thought. He had never been afraid of bold ideas, of concepts that defied convention. But this was different. This was not about pushing forward. It was about looking inward, into the spaces he had always ignored, the spaces he had filled with ambition, with relentless drive, with progress at all costs. The silence stretched between them. The audience was transfixed, leaning in, sensing that the confrontation had reached a precipice. Musk exhaled, forcing himself back into control. If faith was truly about meaning, then what did that say about those who had none? Those who had lost everything, who had been abandoned by the world, who had no reason left to believe. The Pope's gaze softened. He spoke now not as a leader, but as a man who had walked among the suffering, who had sat beside the dying, who had held the hands of those who had nothing left but faith. Faith, he said, was not the absence of despair. It was what remained when everything else had been taken. Musk's chest tightened. He had spent his life focused on the future, on what could be, never stopping to consider what was already here. And now, as he sat in the glow of the candlelight, surrounded by centuries of belief, he felt something shift, a question he had never allowed himself to ask. Was there something he had missed? He did not believe in miracles. He did not believe in destiny. But he had spent his life trying to build something greater than himself, trying to reach beyond the limits of what was known. Was that not, in some way, its own kind of faith? He did not have an answer. Not yet. The Pope watched him carefully, seeing the battle unfolding behind his eyes. And then, quietly, he spoke. The next part of their conversation would not be about logic or suffering. It would be about something even more difficult. It would be about the one thing Musk had never truly confronted, his own heart. And in that moment, for the first time, Musk was afraid. Musk had faced the impossible before. He had gambled entire fortunes on ideas that others dismissed as madness, had stared into the abyss of failure more times than he could count. Yet nothing, not the high-stakes launches, not the scrutiny of billions, not even the relentless pursuit of progress, had ever made him feel like this. This wasn't fear of loss or failure. It was something far more unnerving. It was the fear of facing himself. The Pope had sensed it. He had guided the conversation here deliberately, not to trap Musk, not to win an argument, but because he understood something that Musk had spent a lifetime avoiding. Musk did not fear the unknown. He thrived on it. What he feared was vulnerability. And now the debate had turned inward. The grand cathedral, once an arena for ideological battle, felt smaller, more intimate. The audience was still there, but they had faded into the periphery. This was no longer about them. This was not even about God. It was about the weight Musk carried, the questions buried beneath the layers of ambition, the ones he had never given voice to because they had no place in his world. The Pope's voice was steady, patient. He did not press, but he did not retreat either. He spoke of the human heart, not in the literal, mechanical sense, but in the way that Musk had always dismissed. The seat of emotion, of longing, of that deep, unspoken ache that no amount of success could erase. Musk stiffened. He was not a man prone to introspection, not like this. He had learned to compartmentalize, to keep emotion at arm's length. It was a distraction, an inefficiency, something to be managed, not indulged. Yet now, faced with a man who had devoted his life to the unseen, to the intangible, Musk found himself cornered, not by the Pope, but by his own silence. For the first time, the battle was not external. It was not an argument he could dismantle with logic. It was within him. The Pope leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked onto Musk's with the quiet intensity of a man who had seen the depths of human suffering and knew that even the most brilliant minds were not immune to it. He asked a simple question, one that struck harder than any theological debate. Did Musk ever feel alone? Musk's reaction was immediate, a flash of resistance, of defensiveness. It was a question that had no place here. This was supposed to be about philosophy, about belief, about God, not about him. But the Pope waited, and the silence pressed against Musk like gravity. Of course he felt alone. How could he not? He had built an empire on his shoulders, carried the future of civilization in his hands. He was surrounded by people every day, yet there were nights when he stood on the edge of his own creations, looking out into the vast emptiness of space, and felt something he could not explain, something hollow. He had dismissed it, buried it beneath work, beneath the endless pursuit of something greater. But here, in this cathedral, in the face of a man who had nothing to prove, the question refused to be ignored. The Pope did not gloat. He did not press further. He simply acknowledged the truth of it. Musk had spent his life chasing connection in the form of progress, of technology, of expansion. He had tried to unite humanity through innovation, to build bridges where none existed. But he had never considered that connection, the kind he truly longed for, could not be engineered. It had to be felt, and feeling, true feeling, required. Something Musk had never allowed himself. Faith, not faith in God necessarily, not in scripture or ritual, but faith in the things that could not be measured, in love, in purpose beyond survival, in something greater than himself. Musk's jaw tightened, his mind recoiling from the thought. It was too abstract, too unproven. He needed facts, evidence. But even as he tried to summon his defenses, the questions had already taken root. Was logic enough to sustain a man? Could knowledge replace the need for meaning? If the human mind could solve every problem, then why did emptiness still exist? The Pope did not need to speak. The battle was already raging within Musk. The audience, enraptured, barely breathed. They had come expecting a clash of ideologies, a war of belief against reason. Instead, they were witnessing something far more profound. Musk clenched his fingers against the polished wood of the chair. He could not afford to be vulnerable. Not here, not now. He forced himself back to the argument. If faith was the answer, then why did even the most devout suffer? Why did belief not shield people from pain, from despair? If faith was so powerful, why did it fail? The Pope nodded as if expecting this final resistance. Because faith was not a shield, he said. It was not meant to erase suffering, nor to provide easy answers. It was meant to carry people through suffering, to remind them that even in their lowest moments, they were not truly alone. Musk wanted to reject it. He wanted to dismantle it, to prove it false. But the word struck too close to something he had refused to confront. Had he ever truly believed he was not alone? He had people around him, colleagues, admirers, critics, allies. But connection? That was different. He had built bridges between Earth and Mars, between humanity and the future. But had he ever built a bridge to another person's soul? The Pope did not gloat. He did not celebrate any kind of victory. Instead, he simply sat back, watching Musk with the patience of a man who knew that some questions did not need immediate answers. Musk's mind was a battlefield. Everything he had built, everything he had believed, was now entangled with something new, something unsettling. Faith was not about certainty. It was about the willingness to step into the unknown, and Musk had spent his entire life chasing the unknown. The thought terrified him. But more than that, it intrigued him. Musk's mind churned like the engines of his rockets, burning through calculations, probabilities, and logic in search of an answer, any answer that would let him regain control of this debate. But there was no formula for this, no algorithm to decode what was happening inside him. He had spent his entire life mastering the unknown, yet in this moment he felt like he was standing at the edge of something far more vast than space itself. The Pope did not press him for a response. He simply observed, waiting, as though he already understood what Musk was grappling with. The room, the audience, the grandeur of the cathedral, all of it faded into the background. What remained was the weight of the moment, the quiet, inevitable collision between two men who had spent their lives searching for something greater than themselves. Musk exhaled, slow and controlled. He would not surrender, not in the way people expected. He was not a man of faith, not in the traditional sense. He did not believe in an omnipotent force, in divine intervention, in the structures and rituals that had shaped civilizations for centuries. And yet, he could not ignore what he had felt in this conversation. He could not ignore the moments of silence, the flickers of doubt, the parts of himself he had always avoided looking at too closely. The Pope leaned forward slightly, sensing that Musk was on the precipice of something. His voice was calm but firm, a guiding force rather than a challenge. Faith, he said, was not about certainty. It was not about having all the answers. It was about walking forward even when the path was unclear. It was about trust, not in a deity alone, but in love, in connection, in the unseen forces that bound humanity together. Musk let the words settle. His mind instinctively resisted. He had spent years rejecting blind trust, carving his own path without waiting for permission from unseen forces. His entire existence had been built on defiance, on pushing against the limits of human potential. But wasn't that, in its own way, faith? Had he not believed, without proof, that humanity could reach beyond Earth? Had he not invested his life into ideas that no one had believed in until they became reality? Had he not, time and time again, placed his trust in something greater than himself, the vision of a future that did not yet exist? His fingers tapped against the armrest of his chair, his mind racing, trying to separate belief from ambition, faith from determination. The lines blurred in ways he did not like. He looked at the Pope, who met his gaze with quiet patience. The man who sat before him was not trying to convert him, not trying to impose dogma. He was simply asking him to see, to recognize that faith was not the opposite of reason, but a different form of it. Musk inhaled sharply. He could not bring himself to say the words that so many expected, that he had been wrong, that faith was the missing piece. He did not believe and surrender. He never would, but something had shifted. For the first time, he did not see faith as weakness. For the first time, he did not see it as an obstacle. For the first time, he allowed himself to wonder. The Pope smiled knowingly, as if he had witnessed this transformation before. He did not need to hear Musk say it aloud. Faith did not work that way. It was not a battle to be won or lost. It was a journey, and Musk had taken his first step, even if he did not realize it yet. The audience, sensing the conversation had reached its natural conclusion, stirred slightly, the tension breaking but leaving something heavier in its place. Musk straightened in his chair, collecting himself. He was not a man who changed easily, but he was also not a man who ignored new information, who dismissed what he could not yet explain. He did not concede. He did not need to. Instead, he simply met the Pope's gaze, a silent acknowledgement of something neither of them needed to put into words. There was no winner tonight, no loser. There was only the lingering realization that faith and reason were not as far apart as they had seemed, that perhaps somewhere between them lay something even greater. As Musk stood as the grand doors of the cathedral opened and the cool night air rushed in, he felt it again, that quiet, unsettling, exhilarating feeling, not doubt, not certainty, but possibility, and that was something he could believe in.